Hey, what's up guys? It's Rick with the Digital Divide. If you're a subscriber of this channel and you're anything like me, then chances are you grew up in the 90s playing really awesome arcade games when arcades were kind of just at their inception, like blowing into mainstream popularity. So I was thinking about ways I could relive that in portable form, and I did some research and I found the RetroFlag GPi Case. Now this is not new, this has been around for years, and in fact they came out with a newer model more recently, but I decided to go with this one for reasons that I'll get into later on in the video. Now this is not going to be a how-to video. It's a really long, laborious process. Thankfully there is an amazing YouTube channel called How To, and I will provide a link in the description below. They will go over exactly how to build this, and more importantly, how to configure the software, flash the cartridge, do all that more complicated stuff. Building it is really easy. The software stuff is where it gets a bit complicated. So this is the GPi case itself. And again, this is just a case. It can't do anything by itself. This is just an empty shell. So there's going to be other things that you need to buy. The design is absolutely beautiful. It's made to look just like the original Game Boy. It does take batteries. We'll touch on that a little later. But you're going to need to buy this case to start off with, and then you're going to need to buy a Raspberry Pi Zero. This is the computer that will power everything, and this is what the case was designed to hold. I got the upgraded model that has Wi-Fi, and I highly recommend that, but it's got a 1 GHz single-core CPU, 512 megabytes of RAM, so it's not like the most powerful Pi you can buy, but it's more than enough for emulation for what we're going to be emulating. Now this still is powered on 3 AA batteries, unfortunately, so you are probably going to want to invest in rechargeable batteries and a rechargeable battery charger. I got this Energizer one on Amazon for about 17 bucks. It has a front-facing LED panel that changes based on whether the batteries are charged or not, which is neat. And then I got this Amazon Basics set of AA high-capacity batteries. These are 2400 milliamp batteries, so they will last a while per charge, and they're only about 10 bucks. I bought a couple sets of these. Now this is the RetroFlag itself. It comes in this nice little sleeve. We'll get this opened up. Now this is a really tiny device. It's hard to tell on the video. It's got the standard A, B, X, and Y buttons, which is 2 more buttons than the original Game Boy had, but other than that it looks completely authentic. It's got the volume rocker on the side, and then this is where the micro SD card is stored with all of your games. It does also have 2 left and right shoulder buttons on the back of the unit here, and then we've got a brightness dial on the side, as well as an external power, and then we've got a microphone jack at the bottom there. Now the cartridge isn't really a cartridge. This is actually where the computer is stored. So this, when you buy it, is where you will install your Raspberry Pi Zero. There are 4 screws, 2 on either side of the back of this piece of plastic that house the actual computer, and then it's got an interface board at the bottom that connects to the main unit exactly like an original Game Boy would, which is really neat, but the computer itself is in that top part. Now when we power this thing on, it's not going to turn on instantly like an original Game Boy because the underlying operating system needs to load. I'm going to go ahead and switch cameras here so that you can get a slightly better look at the screen, hopefully. So we're booting into the operating system, and again this initial part does take a while because the underlying OS, which in this case is RetroPie, needs to load, and then every single emulator that you have installed also needs to get loaded, and in my case I have over 40 of those, so it does take a while. I'm going to speed this up for the sake of time. Okay, so now that we're in the main UI, you can see that we've got Atari games, Lynx, we've got Commodore 64, ColecoVision, I've got a bunch of arcade stuff on here, we've even got Game & Watch, Game Gear, Game Boy Advance, all kinds of stuff on here. There's so many games. I've got several thousand games loaded on this thing currently. So we're going to scroll, and I'm going to show you primarily why I set this up. It's to play arcade games. So I'm going to jump into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to show you how it runs. And again, this is the arcade port of the game. This is not one of the console ports, so it's not like the Super Nintendo or Genesis versions, it's the arcade port. So as you can see, the game runs pretty flawlessly. There are some very minor hiccups here and there, but for the most part it emulates this game perfectly. So if we hit start and select, it's going to take us back to the main menu, and we'll jump into another one of my favorite arcade games, The Simpsons. Okay, so we're going to hit start and select again. That'll take us back to the main menu once again, and we'll check out another one of my favorite arcade games, X-Men.
Storm. In the 21st century,
So as you can see, the game runs beautifully. This console does support additional controllers as well, so for these multiplayer games you can play 2-player if you have like a Bluetooth controller. But we're going to jump back into the main menu and take a look at some of the other emulators. We've got Neo Geo, 8-bit Nintendo, we've got hacked versions of those games, we've got Super Nintendo as well, PC Engine, we've also got ports, like there's ports of the Wolfenstein games on here, which is neat. These are custom made for this emulator. We've even got PlayStation, so yes, this thing will even do 3D games. I would say up until about the PlayStation 1 era. So we're going to jump into Tony Hawk's Pro Skater now so you can get an idea of how this thing runs 3D games. So as you can see, I'm horrible at this game. I'm really bad at it, but it runs 3D pretty well, surprisingly. Now, some emulators, when you press start and select, it doesn't immediately kick you out of the game. For the PlayStation emulator, it does give you these options, which is really nice. I think any emulator that requires a BIOS does this. So we're going to jump out and take a look at something else real quick. Let's see what we've got. So we've got some Super Nintendo. We've got some Turbo Graphics. Let's see, I've done some of my favorites. Let's take a look. Look, I've got over 3,000 Amiga games, and they're categorized by letter, so you can tell that I like that system a lot. That's probably the most games I have for any of these consoles. Let's take a look at some fighting games. Now I'm going to jump into some arcade ROMs. We're going to take a look at X-Men Children of the Atom here. Now, the screen is going to be in a widescreen aspect ratio. You can change that so that it's full screen, but I personally prefer to play in the original aspect ratio. I think I'm going to go with Omega Red. Okay, so I'm clearly horrible at this particular version of the game with these controls, so I'm going to jump out of here and quickly switch into another 2D fighting game that is an absolute classic. I'm going to look for Street Fighter. I think I've got a few versions of that here. Specifically, I'm looking for Street Fighter Alpha 3. Let's see if I can find it here. Okay. Yeah, there it is. So we're going to jump in here. I'm just going to do a really quick match so you guys can get an idea of how well this game runs. These old Capcom arcade fighters, they run flawlessly. And again, I have the black bars at the top and bottom because I prefer to keep the aspect ratio of the original arcade unit for these specific versions of the game, but you can change that to make it 4:3. Alright, so that's enough of that. We're going to jump out of this game, and then I'm just going to jump into one other console really quickly just so you can get an idea. There's Game Gear, Game Boy Advance. Yeah, let's jump into a Game Boy Advance game because I think that'll be a really good one for this device. A lot of people will probably emulate something along those lines, and I really love Advanced Wars too. I'm not going to play a whole match, I'm just going to quickly jump into it so that you can see that it's running at full speed. Okay, so we're going to jump out, and then I'm going to scroll over to the power options here, and we're going to shut this down. When you power off this way, it runs a script in the background, which actually shuts the Pi computer off safely, so it doesn't just shut power off to the device. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is a new GPi Case 2. The biggest difference is this one has a 3.0 screen instead of a 2.8-inch screen, and it does have a higher resolution, but I think that's actually to the detriment of retro games because a lot of those games don't run at that resolution, so you're removing the native 1:1 resolution of the previous model and stretching out that image to a higher resolution display. The biggest difference though is that it comes with a dock, much like a Nintendo Switch, that has an HDMI on the back so that you can output this to a TV easier. Now, who is this for, you might be asking yourself? Well, I think that the best use case scenario is somebody looking to emulate 8-bit games up to about the PS1 era of games and have it in a handheld device. Now, the newer version of this case has more room to support the larger, more powerful version of the RetroPie, but the problem there is that once you get into the Dreamcast and PS2 era of emulation, then you really need an analog stick, and this device doesn't have it, and neither does the new case. You also need way more buttons than this thing supports once you get to that level of emulation, so I really think this is best for 8-bit up to about the PlayStation 1 era. It's also great for short bursts of play because the battery only gets about 3 hours of life. It's perfect for arcade emulation in my opinion. The only downsides for me is the software configuration and the save state support is a little iffy depending on the emulator. Getting the software configured on this thing was a real pain. It took me hours to get it just right. Now, as I mentioned before, I opted for the version of the RetroPie Zero that has Wi-Fi support. It is so much easier to get your games on this device. All you have to do is put in the IP address that your unit is assigned once it's connected to your Wi-Fi router, and then you can just remote into it directly without even needing to be physically connected, and you can access configuration files for controls, and you can just drag and drop new ROMs into their respective folders here. It's so much easier if you have the Wi-Fi version of the Raspberry Pi Zero. The alternative is that if you take off the battery port, there is a micro USB that is exposed on the back, but you'll have to find some kind of hardware converter that will plug that into a physical keyboard to get it going. So the total cost to build one of these is around $100, maybe a little bit less. The case itself, if you order it, is about $70, and then the RetroPie Zero is only about $5 to $10 depending on whether or not you get the Wi-Fi version or the non-Wi-Fi version, and then you also have to buy a micro SD card to house everything. Overall, I think it's a neat little project for somebody who's looking for something to do on the weekend. I don't regret buying it. It's not the best emulator in the world, and the battery life is not the best, but it is really fun for what it does, and I don't regret doing it. It's a neat little project.